She hired him to protect her from a stalker. But the storm isn't the only thing hiding a monster tonight, and the greatest danger to her heart might be the man sworn to guard it. The scent of decayed leaves, wet earth, and distant rain hit Caine Lockwood the moment he stepped from his black SUV. It was late October, and the air on the cliffside was a crisp, biting cold that he registered but did not feel. His attention, a laser focus honed by decades of survival, was fixed on the structure looming before him, Ravenwood. It was a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and jagged spires, a silhouette ripped from the pages of one of the very novels its owner was famous for. Perched on the edge of a windswept cliff, it seemed to grow from the rock itself, a permanent scar against the moody twilight sky. Tonight, it was dressed for a party. Skeletons danced in the manicured hedges, antique mirrors hung from leafless trees, reflecting the failing light in fractured, confusing pieces, and 1,000 electric candles flickered in every window, their light a poor imitation of true flame. It was a facade of horror, a carefully constructed stage for playful fright. Caine's lip curled infinitesimally. He dealt in the real thing. He was a man built of quiet intensity, with a ruggedness that spoke of hard miles, not gym hours. His charcoal gray jacket was functional, not fashionable, and did little to conceal the powerful set of his shoulders. His eyes, a stormy gray that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, scanned the perimeter with methodical precision, cataloging vulnerabilities: the dense, shadowy tree line perfect for concealment, the single, narrow access road he'd just climbed, the high, ornate iron fence that was more decorative than functional. He moved with a predator's economy, each step silent and deliberate on the gravel drive. He was here for a job. A simple, well-paying security gig to replenish his funds before moving on. Solitude was his currency, and he spent it frugally. The grand oak door, carved with scenes of mythical beasts, swung open before he could raise the heavy wolf-head knocker. The man who stood there was pale and precise, dressed in an immaculate dark suit that seemed to absorb the fading light. He smelled of printer ink, expensive sandalwood cologne, and something beneath it, a sharp, coppery tang, like old blood and ozone, that made the hairs on Caine's arms prickle. A human wouldn't have noticed it. To Caine, it was an alarm bell. "Mr. Lockwood? I am Malachi Crow, Dr. Ravenwood's personal manager. We've been expecting you. Please, come in. The weather is turning rather foul." His voice was smooth, practiced, but his eyes were busy, darting over Caine's form, assessing his capability just as Caine had assessed the property's defenses. Caine gave a curt, wordless nod and stepped across the threshold into the cavernous foyer. The interior was exactly as he'd expected. Vaulted ceilings, dark wood paneling, a grand staircase that swept upwards into shadows, and shelves crammed with thousands of books. The Halloween theme continued inside with a kind of macabre elegance. A life-size suit of armor held a silver bowl of expensive chocolates. A magnificent crystal chandelier was draped artfully in faux cobwebs. The air smelled of beeswax, old paper, and a faint, sweet note of incense. And then he saw her. She descended the staircase, a living vision in stark contrast to her morbid surroundings. Dr. Seraphine Ravenwood was younger than he'd anticipated, perhaps late 20s, with intelligent, watchful eyes, the color of rich earth, and a cascade of dark chestnut hair that fell over her shoulder. She wore a simple black cashmere sweater and dark jeans, looking more like a preoccupied graduate student than a world-renowned literary titan. She was the picture of modern composure, but Caine's senses, sharper than any human's, detected the rapid, fluttery rhythm of her heartbeat, the faint, acrid scent of anxiety beneath her jasmine perfume. But that was all background noise, static against a sudden, deafening signal. The moment his eyes met hers, a seismic shift occurred within him. A force, ancient and undeniable, roared to life in the core of his chest. His wolf, the beast he kept chained deep within his soul, did not just stir, it surged against its restraints with a force that stole his breath. It didn't snarl or rage, it recognized. A single, primal word, more feeling than language, echoed through every fiber of his being, shaking the very foundation of his solitary existence. Mate. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. The professional detachment he wore like a second skin shattered into a million pieces. An instinctual, overwhelming need to claim her, to shield her, to bury his face in the curve of her neck and breathe in the truth of her scent nearly brought him to his knees. A low, involuntary rumble threatened to escape his throat, and he clenched his jaw so hard the bone ached. He had spent over a century running from packs, from connection, believing his lycanthropy was a curse to be born alone, a monster to be contained. And in one devastating, heart-stopping heartbeat, this human woman had unraveled a lifetime of rigid control. "Mr. Lockwood," she said, her voice a low, captivating tremor that resonated in his bones. She offered a small, nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've heard you're the best. I hope the rumors are true. She descended the final steps and extended her hand. The gesture was simple, professional. To Caine it felt like a test of willpower. He took her hand, his own engulfing hers. Her skin was soft, warm. Another jolt, warm and terrifyingly pleasant, shot up his arm. He saw her breath catch, her eyes widen a fraction. She felt it too, this inexplicable pull, even if she didn't understand it. The threats, he said, his voice rougher than he intended, a gravelly sound that betrayed his inner turmoil. He released her hand as if burned. I need to see them, now. He saw a flicker of surprise at his bluntness, but she nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Of course, in here. She led him into a study that was clearly her sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowed with well-loved volumes. A massive oak desk was buried under manuscripts, notes, and a sleek laptop. The air here smelled overwhelmingly of her jasmine, ink, and a unique intellectual energy that was uniquely Seraphine. It was intoxicating. Malachi followed them in, positioning himself near the fireplace, a silent, watchful sentinel. The threats were laid out in a neat folder on her desk, printed emails, scanned letters. Seraphine handed them to him, her fingers carefully avoiding his this time. They started about 6 months ago, she explained, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. Fan mail at first, flattering even, then they became personal. He knows things about my childhood, about the layout of this house, that he shouldn't. It's like he's been watching me for years. Caine read the messages, his keen eyes missing nothing. The language was archaic, laced with a possessive, unsettling madness. Your words, my dear doctor, are a siren's call, a melody composed for my ears alone. I will come for you on the night when the veil is thinnest, when the moon is full and proud in the sky. I will claim my muse, and we will transcend this mortal plane. The old pact, forgotten by your line, will be fulfilled. The blood of Ravenwood must atone. He references an old pact, Caine noted, his senses screaming now. This was far more than standard obsession. This was ritualistic, purposeful, a central theme in my last book, Seraphine said, though she sounded uncertain, her brow furrowed. A bargain with a dark force for artistic genius. I thought he was just parroting my work, a particularly dedicated fan. He isn't, Caine stated flatly. The words on the page smelled of truth and genuine, ancient menace. He committed the peculiar phrasing to memory. He also committed the scent of her fear, vowing to himself with a ferocity that surprised him that he would be the unbreachable wall between her and whatever sought to harm her. His wolf, pacing now just beneath his skin, howled its fervent agreement. For the next few hours, Caine worked, using the routine of assessment to rebuild the walls around his turmoil. He walked the full, extensive perimeter of Havenwood, the wind whipping at his jacket. His enhanced hearing filtered the rustle of every leaf, the distant crash of waves on the cliffs 100 feet below, the scurrying of a fox in the undergrowth. He noted every weak point, a rusted gate latch, a drain pipe that provided easy access to a second-story window, a blind spot behind the old greenhouse. Inside, he memorized the labyrinthine floor plan, the placement of every door and window, every potential ambush point in the long portrait-lined hallways. His path crossed Seraphine several times as she tried to work in her study. Each encounter was a fresh wave of exquisite torture. She was curious, asking him questions about his methods, his past clients, trying to pierce his stony exterior. Have you always done this kind of work, Mr. Lockwood? What's the most dangerous situation you've ever faced? He offered grunts and one-word answers, maintaining a gruff, professional distance that felt like the greatest lie he'd ever told. Security. Confidential. She was intrigued, not put off, her writer's mind clearly fascinated by his silence and intensity. Meanwhile, Malachi was always there, a constant presence on the periphery, his metallic scent a persistent, unsettling note in the air. He offered unsolicited comments on the security system, the storm preparations, always with a veneer of helpfulness that set Caine's teeth on edge. As dusk deepened into an oppressive purple night, the promised storm arrived not with a gentle roll of thunder, but with a violent, sky-splitting crack that shook the very foundations of the mansion. Rain lashed against the stone walls and leaded windows in relentless horizontal sheets. The lights flickered once, twice, painting the grotesque Halloween decorations in strobes of light and shadow, and then died completely, plunging Havenwood into a darkness that was absolute. The sudden silence was profound, filled only by the demonic roar of the wind and the frantic staccato of rain against glass. A moment later, a flashlight beam cut through the gloom. Malachi stood in the doorway of the study, his face a pale mask in the artificial light. The main generator appears to be flooded. The backup power will only sustain the emergency lights for a few hours. The landline is dead. I've just tried the causeway on the monitor. A landslide has completely blocked it. We are cut off. He stated it with a chilling calmness. The playful Halloween decorations were now transformed into things of genuine nightmare. The grinning skeletons in the corners seemed to leer with malicious intent. The shadows cast by the suit of armor in the foyer twisted and elongated into monstrous, shifting shapes on the wall. The electric candles were dead eyes in the darkness. The carefully constructed stage was set, but the fright was no longer playful. It was visceral. It was real. Caine Lockwood, the lone werewolf, stood in the oppressive dark beside the woman who was his destiny, the weight of the approaching full moon a tangible pressure in his blood. He knew, with a cold certainty, that the human threat outside the walls was now the least of his problems. His greatest enemy, the beast he feared would make her recoil in horror, was clawing its way up from within. The darkness inside Havenwood was not merely an absence of light, it was a physical presence, thick and heavy and alive with the sounds of the storm. The weak, orange emergency lights cast more shadows than they dispelled, transforming familiar hallways into tunnels of lurking uncertainty. The playful shrieks and spooky soundtracks that had been part of the party decor were silenced, leaving only the symphony of the gale, the moan of wind in the chimneys, the relentless drum of rain, and the occasional groan of the ancient house settling under the assault. Caine's world had narrowed to a series of sensory inputs. Seraphine's heartbeat was a rapid, steady drum he could track from anywhere in the mansion, a constant, reassuring rhythm beneath the storm's chaos. Malachi's metallic scent was a trail he could follow, a strange alien signature that stood out against the organic smells of wood, books, and rain. And his own inner turmoil was a rising tide, the pull of the full moon a persistent, aching thrum in his veins, a song of wild freedom that his control fought to silence. He found Seraphine in the study, attempting to light a few real candles with trembling hands. The flickering flame illuminated the worry etched on her face. "It's just a storm," she said, more to herself than to him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "And a power outage. It's fine." "It's not," Caine's voice rumbled from the doorway, making her jump. He stepped into the room, his form swallowing the scant light. "The landslide was no accident. The timing is too convenient. Your phantom planned for this. He's using the storm as a weapon." The color drained from her face. "You really believe he's out there? Right now?" "I know he island." Caine's gaze was fixed on the window, where rainwater sheeted down the glass, obscuring the view of the violent night. "I need to do a full sweep of the grounds. The darkness and noise give him cover. Stay here, with him." He didn't need to specify Malachi, who had just entered with a battery-powered lantern. "Absolutely, Mr. Lockwood," Malachi said, his tone oily with false concern. "We shall be perfectly safe locked in here. Do be careful outside. It's a treacherous night." The coppery tang of his scent seemed to intensify, and Caine fought back a growl. The man's calmness felt performative, wrong. Without another word, Caine melted back into the shadows of the hallway. He didn't need a flashlight. The world outside, though terrifying to a human, was crystal clear to him in shades of gray and silver. He slipped out a side door, the wind immediately clawing at his clothes, and disappeared into the lashing rain. The grounds were a waterlogged nightmare. The howling wind masked finer sounds, forcing him to rely on his sense of smell. He moved like a ghost through the sodden gardens, past the dancing skeletons that now jerked and spasmed in the gale, like victims of a hangman's rope. He circled the property, his senses stretched to their limit, finding nothing but drowned flower beds and shivering trees. It was near the old greenhouse, its glass panels rattling ominously, that the first wrong scent hit him. It was musky, feral, and utterly alien. It wasn't wolf, bear, or any natural animal he knew. It was old, it was wrong, and it was laced with the same coppery, ozonic signature that clung to Malachi. A low growl built in his throat, instinctual and warning. He followed the scent trail which led away from the house towards the cliff's edge. The rain lessened for a moment, and in the brief respite, he heard it a sound that was not the storm, a heavy, panting breath, the crunch of gravel under a massive paw. He rounded a corner of a tall hedge and froze. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was the size of a large bear but built like a grotesque wolf, its body seemingly stitched together from shadow and malice. Its fur was coarse and matted, glistening black in the night, and its eyes glowed with a sickly, intelligent yellow light. It wasn't a natural-born thing, it was a thing made, a warg, a creature of dark magic. It was sniffing at the ground, following a path that led directly to a side entrance of the mansion, to Seraphine. There was no time for strategy, no time for fear. As the creature's head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto him, Caine knew it was a fight to the death. It charged with a speed that belied its size, a silent, deadly missile. Caine met its charge. He didn't have time to fully shift, but he let the wolf surge to the surface. His bones cracked and reshaped just enough. His hands became claw-tipped, his canines elongated, a savage snarl tearing from his throat. The change was partial, agonizingly confined, but it granted him the strength and speed he needed. The impact was brutal. They crashed together in a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a silent, vicious dance in the raging storm. The warg was strong, its attacks fueled by a magic that felt corrosive and cold. Caine fought with the raw, primal fury of a werewolf defending his mate. He raked his claws across its flank, feeling unnatural hide tear. It slammed a massive paw into his side, and he felt a searing pain as claws ripped through his jacket and into his flesh. He drove his shoulder into its chest, forcing it back, and in the struggle his claws caught on a thick tuft of its coarse fur, tearing it free. The creature let out a soundless yelp of surprise and pain, recoiling. It eyed him with a new, wary hatred before turning and melting back into the shadows from whence it came, leaving Caine panting and bleeding in the rain. The pain in his side was white-hot. He clamped a hand over the wound, feeling the warm seep of blood through his fingers. But he also felt the deeper magic of his body already responding, the flesh knitting itself back together at an accelerated rate. He had to get inside. He had to hide the injury. Stumbling back into the mansion through the side door, he leaned against the cool wall of a servant's corridor, trying to steady his breathing. The partial shift receded, leaving him achingly human and vulnerable. The scent of his own blood was strong in his nostrils. "Caine?" He jerked his head up. Seraphine stood at the end of the corridor, a candle in her hand, her face a mask of concern. "I thought I heard a noise. Oh my God, you're hurt." She rushed forward, her fear forgotten in her urgency. "It's nothing," he grunted, trying to turn away. A branch snapped in the wind. "Don't be ridiculous. That's blood. Let me see." Her tone brooked no argument, the same voice she must use with stubborn editors. She set the candle down on a small table and reached for him. He flinched back, but she was insistent. Gently, she pushed his torn jacket and shirt aside. He braced for her scream. The wound, which should have been gaping and terrible, was already a set of angry, half-closed red lines. It looked days old, not minutes. Her breath hitched, but it wasn't a sound of terror. It was one of profound, stunned confusion. Her fingers, warm and soft, hovered just above the injured flesh, not touching. She looked from the impossible wound to his face, her eyes wide not with fright, but with a dawning, terrifying curiosity. "What are you?" she whispered, the words swallowed by the storm's howl but echoing loudly in the silent space between them. The question hung in the air, shattering the last pretense of normalcy. The professional bodyguard facade was gone. He was just a man, caught in a lie that was written on his very skin. Before he could form a lie, a new sound echoed through the house, a heavy, dragging noise from the floor above, followed by the distinct sound of shattering glass. Seraphine's head snapped up, her question forgotten in the face of a new immediate threat. "The library." They moved as one, Caine pushing his pain aside. They found Malachi already at the library door, his lantern held high. One of the large, stained glass windows was broken inward, and rain was gusting onto the Persian rug. A large, muddy rock lay amidst the glittering shards. "A rock!" Malachi exclaimed, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine alarm. "Thrown through the window! He's trying to get in!" But Caine wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at the floor. There were no wet footprints leading from the shattered window into the room. Only the rock and the rain. The rock hadn't been thrown from outside. It had been thrown from inside, to make it look that way. It was a distraction. His eyes scanned the room, his senses on fire. And that's when he caught it again, the musky, feral scent of the warg. It was faint, but it was here, in this room. It led away from the broken window, towards the wall of bookshelves. While Malachi made a show of securing the broken window with a plank of wood, Caine followed the scent. It was strongest near a section of shelves filled with rare, leather-bound first editions. His eyes fell on one specific book, its spine noticeably less dusty than its neighbors. It was one of Seraphine's own Pact of the Blood. Driven by instinct, he pulled on it. There was a soft, grinding click. An entire section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a dark, hidden passageway smelling of damp stone, old magic, and that unmistakable coppery tang. Seraphine gasped. I never knew this was here." Malachi's face, when Caine looked back at him, was a carefully neutral mask, but his eyes held a flicker of something cold and furious. Caine took a candle from a holder and stepped into the darkness, Seraphine close behind him. The passage led down a narrow spiral staircase into a cold subterranean chamber. The air was thick with the smell of grave dirt and ancient parchment. The chamber was not a stalker's nest, it was a reliquary. A shrine. Jars of earth and strange, preserved organs lined one shelf. On another lay a collection of vicious-looking daggers, their blades etched with intricate witch-hunting sigils and lined with silver. But the centerpiece was on a large wooden table, a sprawling genealogy chart, hand-drawn on yellowed parchment. Names going back centuries were connected by intricate lines, and at the very bottom, a name was circled in what looked like dried blood. Seraphine Ravenwood. Next to the chart lay a single weathered journal. Caine opened it. The handwriting was a familiar, precise script. Malachi's script. The entries were not the ramblings of a fan, they were the clinical observations of a hunter. Subject shows no active sign of the craft, but the bloodline is pure. The potential is there, lying dormant. The convergence approaches, all is prepared, the beast is hired, the perfect scapegoat. Its savage nature will explain the necessary desecration of the bloodline. On the full moon, the last Ravenwood witch will die, and my family's ancient pact will finally be fulfilled. The world will be cleansed of her kind. Caine looked up from the journal, his blood running colder than the chamber's air. He met Seraphine's horrified gaze. The stalker wasn't an obsessive fan, he was a witch hunter. And he wasn't in the storm outside, he was standing in the library above them. The threat wasn't a human, it was supernatural, and the man she trusted most was the one who wanted to sacrifice her to fulfill a deranged ancestral vow. Caine's job had just catastrophically changed. He wasn't just protecting her from a stranger, he was protecting her from the wolf, from the storm, and from the viper she had welcomed into her home. The silence in the hidden chamber was heavier than the stone above them. It was the silence of shattered trust, of a world tilting on its axis. Seraphine stared at the genealogy chart. Her name circled in what she now understood was likely blood. Her face was pale, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Malachi," she whispered, the name of betrayal on her lips. All this time, the emails, the threats, it was him. He was... She couldn't finish, wrapping her arms around herself as a violent shiver racked her body. The man who had managed her career, organized her life, whom she'd considered a friend, a lonely, peculiar one, but a friend nonetheless, was the architect of her terror. Caine was already moving, his senses screaming. The revelation was catastrophic, but it was also a clarity. The enemy had a name and a face. The strange metallic scent was the stink of fanaticism and dark magic. The warg was Malachi's familiar, a creature bound to his will. "We need to go. Now," Caine said, his voice a low, urgent growl. He extinguished the candle, plunging them into absolute blackness for a moment before his own night-adapted vision took over. He took her hand, his grip firm and sure, and pulled her back towards the stairs. "He knows we're down here. He'll be waiting." They emerged from the bookcase into the library. The room was empty. The plank had been pulled away from the broken window, and the storm screamed into the room, whipping pages from books into a frenzied dance. A sudden, searing pain lanced through Caine's skull. He staggered, clutching his head. It wasn't a physical blow, it was the moon. It had cleared the storm clouds, and its full, brilliant, terrible light was shining directly through the broken window, bathing him in its silvery glow. The pull was no longer an ache, it was an excruciating, irresistible command. His bones burned, his muscles writhed beneath his skin. The wolf wasn't just pacing, it was tearing at the bars of its cage, howling for freedom, for its mate. "Caine, what's wrong?" Seraphine's voice was laced with panic, her earlier curiosity now replaced by raw fear for him. "The moon," he gritted out, every word a struggle. He could feel his canines pressing against his lips, his fingers curling into claws. He was losing control, and the monster was about to be revealed not in a moment of heroic protection, but in one of vulnerable, terrifying transformation. A calm, chilling voice cut through the wind from the doorway. "I see the beast finds the light of truth, unbearable." Malachi stood there, but he was transformed. Gone was the unassuming assistant. He stood straight, his eyes burning with a zealous fire. In one hand he held a long, wicked-looking dagger, its blade etched with sigils that seemed to drink the light. In his other he held a heavy chain leash, and at the end of it was the warg, its yellow eyes fixed on Seraphine, a low, rumbling growl vibrating in its chest. The gash on its flank from its fight with Caine was already closed, leaving only a faint, silvery scar. "Malachi, why?" Seraphine's voice broke, the plea of a betrayed child. "Why?" Malachi repeated, a fanatic smile twisting his features. "For purification, my dear, for a promise made by my ancestors to cleanse this world of the filth of witchcraft. Your bloodline is an abomination, a blight. Your parents understood. They tried to hide you, to make you forget your heritage. The fire was regrettably necessary, but it failed in its ultimate purpose. You survived. The memory, long buried by trauma, slammed into Seraphine. Not an accident, a murder. Her parents, killed for what they were, for what she was. You," the word was a sob of pure anguish. "I have spent years guiding you, nurturing your career, keeping you isolated and safe. Malachi continued, his tone almost conversational, as if discussing a publishing deal. Also, you would be here, tonight, ripe and ready for the harvest. The full moon on Samhain provides the perfect conduit for the sacrificial magic. Your death, at the claws of this creature? He gestured contemptuously at Caine, who was shaking with the effort to remain still. Will be a poetic end, the last Ravenwood witch, slain by a monster. The world will see it as a tragedy. I will see it as a victory. He jerked the chain. Now, the garden. The ritual site is prepared. The moon will not wait. The warg took a menacing step forward. Caine moved to put himself between it and Seraphine, but a fresh wave of lunar agony buckled his knees. He was out of time. Run, Seraphine, he snarled, the words distorted, his voice deepening. Now! But it was too late. Malachi murmured a guttural word, and the warg lunged, not at Caine, but straight for Seraphine. Caine roared, a sound that was barely human, and threw himself in its path. They crashed together in a tangle of fury and claws, a whirlwind of violence in the center of the library. Enough! Malachi shouted. He raised the dagger, and it began to glow with a faint, malevolent light. He chanted in a low, ancient tongue, and spectral chains of shimmering energy erupted from the floor, wrapping around Caine, binding him, burning his skin where they touched. The magic was specifically designed to contain supernatural beings. The wolf howled in rage and frustration, trapped within a prison of light and pain. Malachi grabbed a sobbing, struggling Seraphine by the arm, his grip like iron. The beast is contained. Let us proceed. He dragged her out of the library, down the main hall, and through the French doors that led to the cliffside garden. The warg, its task complete, followed at his heels, leaving Caine imprisoned in the library, the full moon's light taunting him through the window. The garden was a scene of surreal horror. The storm had abated, and the full moon hung in the now clear sky, a massive, watchful eye. Its light illuminated the manicured lawns, the dancing skeletons, and the stone altar that had been hidden beneath a decorative plinth. It was old, stained dark, and etched with the same sigils as Malachi's dagger. Seraphine fought with a strength she didn't know she possessed, but Malachi was inhumanly strong, fueled by his dark purpose. He threw her against the cold stone of the altar, the wind knocked from her lungs. The warg stood guard, a silent, monstrous sentinel. The hour is at hand, Malachi cried to the moon, raising the dagger high. With this blade I sever the line, with this blood I fulfill the pact. He began the incantation again, his voice rising to a fever pitch. The sigils on the dagger and the altar began to glow brighter. Inside the library, Caine felt the magical chains burning into his soul. He could hear Seraphine's heartbeat, frantic with terror. He could smell her fear. His mate was going to die feet away from him, and he was trapped. No, the thought was not his, not the wolf's. It was something deeper. It was the fusion of both. It was the love of the man and the fury of the beast. The fear of revealing himself vanished, burned away by a greater terror, the fear of losing her. With a final, shattering effort of will, he stopped fighting the moon. He embraced it. He threw his head back, and a howl tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated power that shook the very foundations of Havenwood. The magical chains strained, flickered, and shattered like glass. The change was not a painful struggle, but a violent, instantaneous explosion. Clothes tore, muscle and bone expanded. Gray fur erupted from his skin. Where a man had knelt, a massive, powerful wolf now stood. But these were not the yellow, sickly eyes of the warg. These were Caine's stormy gray eyes, blazing with intelligent, conscious fury. He was not a mindless beast. He was a protector. And his mate was in danger. He exploded through the French doors, splintering the wood and glass. Malachi, his chant reaching its crescendo, faltered. His eyes widened in genuine shock. The werewolf was free, and it was charging. The warg intercepted Caine mid-leap. The two titans of myth and magic collided in a cataclysmic battle of tooth and claw. It was a savage, brutal dance under the moonlight, a whirlwind of gray and black fur, snarls, and the sickening sound of tearing flesh. Caine fought with a focused rage the warg could not match. The warg was a puppet, a thing of spell and instinct. Caine was fighting for a reason. He ducked under a sweeping paw and sank his teeth into the warg's throat. With a powerful jerk of his head, he tore out its essence. The creature didn't bleed. It dissipated into a cloud of black smoke and the coppery scent of failed magic, its chain falling with a clatter to the ground. Malachi screamed in rage and denial. His familiar was gone, his ritual was broken. All he had left was the knife. He raised it, aiming for Seraphine's heart, determined to finish it. "You will not deny my destiny," he shrieked. As the silver-lined blade descended, Seraphine's terror reached its peak. But it didn't paralyze her, it unlocked her. Malachi's words, the altar, the moon, the sight of Caine, her wolf, fighting for her, it all coalesced into a key that turned in a door she never knew existed. The world didn't explode in fire, it moved in shadow. The very darkness around her coalesced, obeying a command she didn't consciously give. The shadows from the grinning jack-o'-lanterns stretched into long, ropey tendrils that whipped out, wrapping around Malachi's wrist, halting the dagger inches from her chest. The skeletal hands of the decorative skeletons lining the garden path reached up from the earth, their bony fingers clamping around his ankles, holding him fast. Malachi stared, his fanatic certainty crumbling into utter disbelief. No, the craft. It's dormant. It cannot be. Seraphine pushed herself up from the altar, her eyes glowing with a faint silvery light. The shadows themselves seemed to cling to her, a living cloak. She wasn't throwing fireballs, she was commanding the darkness. It was her heritage, it was her power. The stories she wrote weren't just stories, they were a memory, a birthright she had finally claimed. Caine, in his wolf form, stood by her side, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Together they faced the trapped hunter. The fight went out of Malachi. His weapon was useless, his magic was broken, his prey was now the predator. He could only stare, muttering about abominations and broken packs, as Seraphine's shadows held him fast. The storm, as if acknowledging the battle was over, broke completely. The clouds cleared, and the moon shone down on the garden, illuminating the defeated hunter, the powerful wolf, and the woman who had finally found her strength. The authorities found them hours later. Caine, back in human form, his wound now a faint pink line. Seraphine, calm and collected, weaved a story of a deluded cultist, Malachi Crow, who had developed a deranged obsession based on her novels. She spoke of his sudden, violent breakdown, his attempt to sacrifice her in a storm-induced frenzy, and how her security guard, Mr. Lockwood, had heroically subdued him. The broken window, the rock, the strange altar, it all fit the narrative of a madman. Malachi, catatonic and broken by his failure, offered no coherent rebuttal. In the quiet dawn, as the police led a shackled Malachi away, Caine stood by his SUV, ready to leave. The job was over. The threat was neutralized. She had seen him, all of him, and had not fled. But she was a famous, brilliant woman. He was a monster. His place was in the shadows, alone. "Where do you think you're going?" He turned. Seraphine stood there, the morning sun catching the hints of chestnut in her hair. She hugged herself against the chill, but her gaze was steady, warm, and utterly fearless. "The job is done," he said, his voice rough. "Is it?" She took a step closer. "He knew what I was, and you knew what you were, and you stayed. You fought for me." She looked towards the mansion, then back at him, a new light in her eyes, the light of self-discovery and acceptance. "You're not the monster in my story, Caine. You're the hero." She closed the final distance between them. She didn't flinch from his intense gaze. Slowly, she reached up and placed a hand against his cheek. The touch was electric, calming the last restless echoes of the wolf. "My next book," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since he'd arrived. "It's about a woman who discovers her family's secret, and the wolf who helped her embrace it. I think it could be my best work yet." Her smile widened. "But I'm going to need a research partner, someone with first-hand experience." Caine looked into her eyes and saw no fear, no revulsion. He saw only understanding, and a future he had never dared to imagine. The lone wolf had howled at the moon, and for the first time he had received an answer. He placed his hand over hers, leaning into its warmth, and the ghost of a smile touched his own lips. The howling had stopped. He was finally home.
Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.